everybody, and welcome to day 2. Apparently we are competing with our own events, breakfast events that are ending at 9. So if you feel it's slightly empty, it's because one of the events ends at 9 and people have to come over here. So I'm asked to sort of be standing here showing slides for the next 10 minutes. I'll try to figure something out. No, never mind. We will get started, and I hope that you did what I told you to do last night, so you actually spent the evening trying to make big deals, because that was sort of one of the conclusions coming out. We need big deals, we need winners. So I hope that we will have a great announcement over the next couple of days on great new projects. We have also a full day today. We have until lunch in this room, and then there is a site visit to show how things would look in real life. And please, just a small reminder, if you have questions for the panels, you can always use Slido. And as you can see, we always sort of bring them in when there's 10 minutes left, so there will be time for those questions. I think that was the overall announcement for this morning. So let's get started. And just to make sure that everybody would be on time, we are starting on a high note. So we will first have a fire chat and then a panel. And for the fire chat, we have invited Turan from the Global CCS Institute. I'm sure all of you know their reports. We are very keen to read them in Denmark, given that we are now ranked 3rd in the policy environment. Just if nobody notices that, 3rd. And we've been working on this since 2020. Some countries have been working longer time, and they're not 3rd. Good. And to have the discussion with her, we have Brad Kadri from the Department of Energy in the US. So both of you, you are more than welcome on stage. Please join us.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and would like to thank the Danish government and the Commission for hosting us and for the wonderful packed day yesterday with the announcements from the Commission and, of course, the Aalborg Declaration. But as Anders said, we're looking forward to another full day today and a site visit afterwards. And I'm delighted to kick off the day this morning with Brad Kadri, who is well known, I'm sure, to most of you in this community, in this crowd. Brad was with us last year at the CCUS forum in Oslo. He is the Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy and Carbon Management at the Department of Energy. And prior to that, as the co-leader, as the co-founder and leader of the Carbon Capture Coalition, Brad has led many delegations of policymakers and business people overseas to exchange views, exchange learning. So Brad, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Lauren.
Could I start by asking you how CCUS and perhaps more broadly carbon management fits into US's net zero, meeting US's climate targets and net zero goals?
Sure. So thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be back with this event. It was the event last year in Oslo was excellent, and the momentum continues to grow. In the United States, carbon management, like here, is an essential pillar of meeting our climate goals, which are to 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, zero emissions power sector by 2035, and net zero emissions economy-wide by 2050. And as we all know and has been discussed yesterday at length, we don't get down the net zero path without economy-wide deployment of not only carbon capture, but also carbon removal over time. This is my second time in Europe where the United States finally has a comprehensive and ambitious climate policy as a result of legislation that's passed the past several years. And at this point, in the infrastructure legislation that's now 2 years old, there's a $12 billion investment in carbon management over 5 years. And if you add hydrogen, that becomes $20 billion. And we are in the process now of almost being through the first round of tenders, what you call here tenders, we call solicitations for funding, for our infrastructure bill funding. And so we have announced 2 of the 4 regional direct air capture hubs, each of which will store 1 million tons of CO2 captured from ambient air We also just recently announced the 7 regional hydrogen hubs, 4 of which involve carbon management by producing clean hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture. And very soon we will be announcing the first of several commercial scale carbon capture demos. So that whole process of getting the money out the door, selecting the applicants, is underway, and we'll be doing this on a rolling basis over the next half of a decade. And that also, we can talk later, but that also includes CO2 transport and storage as well.
Mm-hmm. US is a leader in terms of both policy and project deployment when it comes to carbon management. Are there any learnings that US, such as policymakers such as yourselves, have seen in Europe? Are there any inspirations from Europe in terms of climate mitigation and carbon management?
There are. In fact, I would go back to 2 decades ago, in 2006, 2007, some of our work on advancing our 45Q tax credit was inspired by bringing delegations of Americans to Northern Europe to see early efforts here. And then when we passed our infrastructure legislation, the CO2 transport and storage component was inspired by the commitments we were seeing from the Norwegian and then the Dutch governments on projects. And there's $5 billion over 5 years for CO2 transport and storage, which is, we took that directly to the United States Congress and said, look at what Northern European countries are doing, countries that are much smaller than the United States. And then I think that's the other inspiration, and it doesn't get recognized enough. At the last event, I talked about the commitments in our infrastructure legislation and pointed out that the Norwegian commitment to Longship and related projects, if the United States were to make a comparable commitment, that would be $140 billion on a per capita basis. And met with Anders the other night and was asking him about the numbers here, and I'm just going to look at them. So Denmark has committed 38 billion Danish kroner over 15 years, as you've heard. A comparable per capita US investment would be $313 billion. So that gives a little perspective. And I think if you include the value of the 45Q tax credit over the 10-year period that's available, we might get to several $100 billion. But I don't think that the significance of commitments that national governments are making in Europe gets enough recognition.
Appreciate that, and I always hear you and talk about sort of Norway, Denmark, etc. So it's great to sort of, hear of this kind of cross collaboration, cross learnings. Talking about cross learnings, at the moment, as the Institute, we released our global status report a couple of weeks ago, and globally, the project pipeline in terms of projects in construction and in advanced development is at a record high. So now, which is great, now as we're seeing projects sort of go from the development stage, evolve from the development stage to execution phase, what challenges do we face as the CCS community, the CCUS community in North America and in Europe, and are there opportunities to collaborate in that space?
So our situation now in the United States is radically different from where it was just 3 or 4 years ago. I started working on carbon capture policy in 2002, so basically 20 years. And for all but the last few years, the challenge has been, how do you finance a project? Now in the United States, we have a policy framework of federal funding and financing, coupled with tax credits on the incentive side, that could lead to levels of deployment that will actually test our ability to deploy projects and infrastructure. So just to give some perspective, and Lee and Aagaard and others from the Clean Air Task Force are here, but they maintain a carbon management project tracker in the United States. And I just checked this morning, and that tracker has reached almost 200 publicly announced projects. To give you, but for some comparison, the United States currently has 14 operating commercial scale carbon capture projects. So we're talking about more than an order of magnitude increase. There's analysis suggesting that between the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, funding and tax credits, we could reach deployment of 250 million to 300 million metric tons of annual carbon capture and storage in the United States by 2035. So That's an extraordinary level of deployment. It actually would put us on a track that the modeling suggests is necessary to reach net zero in terms of the contribution of carbon management. But, and here's the but, we have 169 applications for geologic storage permits pending right now before our Environmental Protection Agency, 169. And so we're looking at very serious potential limitations on permitting. The Department of Energy, we're trying to support our Environmental Protection Agency. We have 8 of our national labs providing scientists and geologists to actually help at the level of the analysis of these permits. 2 of the 50 states now have delegated authority at the federal level to do permitting at the state level. That could help speed things up, but there's a very real risk that we have this incredible array of policies and we don't have sufficient permitting. The other challenge, and I was thinking about this yesterday when you had the panel on social license. Yeah. We have that challenge very significantly in the United States. Some of the same populist trends that you see in Europe, just the elections last week in the Netherlands. We obviously have that in the United States. And we are seeing opposition not only to carbon capture and storage projects, but to renewables and transmission. And it spans the political spectrum. I come from North Dakota, which is a very conservative part of the United States. And there we see landowners, farmers, ranchers organizing to oppose CO2 pipelines and oppose wind energy development as well. And then on our Gulf Coast, we have communities that have basically borne the brunt of pollution next to chemical plants, refineries, other industrial facilities for many, many years. And they're asking hard questions about, if you deploy carbon management, what does that mean about all the other pollution? And so we're very focused as a department in transforming how we do our work. So in this $20 billion of carbon management and hydrogen funding, we are building community benefit plans into that funding. So a company that wants funding for a project from the US government now has to have plans for community engagement, diversity and inclusion, environmental justice, and workforce development, so that not only do we reduce CO2 emissions, but we also deliver economic and environmental benefits to the communities that are most affected on the ground.
And indeed, as we heard yesterday, and we're going to continue to hear today, permitting is a challenge in Europe as well. And we heard from the Commission some of the steps that they're planning to undertake in the Net Zero Industry Act as well. And of course, public acceptance or rather sort of encouraging public support, having more public support is something that we as a community are working on as well in Europe. If we are to take a step back and look sort of more internationally, Brad, could you tell us a little bit about the Carbon Management Challenge and what it is trying to achieve and any of the sort of potential next steps that we might expect to see?
Yeah, I'm very excited about the Carbon Management Challenge because in many ways it's a reflection of the growing momentum that we're seeing here in this room and within Europe, but it's global in scope. President Biden announced the Carbon Management Challenge in April in partnership with a number of countries. We now have 17 countries, 16 plus the European Commission. And what's exciting is that the diversity of the countries reflects the range of carbon management solutions and the needs that these technologies meet. So we have countries with no fossil fuels like Iceland and Sweden with zero emissions in their power sectors are part of the Carbon Management Challenge. We have some of the largest oil and gas producers in the world, the United States, Canada, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, among others. And then we have some leading developing countries, Brazil, Indonesia, Mozambique just joined. So that in and of itself says a lot about the importance of carbon management and how it's perceived as both a climate solution and an energy solution, depending on where you are in the world. And I'd say there are 2 goals, broad goals for the Carbon Management Challenge. One is to continue to elevate and legitimize carbon management as a climate solution. That task we've made a lot of progress in North America and Europe, but I think on a global basis, there's a lot more to be done, and especially in the United Nations and other multilateral contexts. The other part of it, though, is really about deployment, and that's to catalyze through actions of individual governments and of the private sector and policies 1 gigawatts worth of carbon management projects by 2030. It's not a binding commitment for UN negotiations on climate. Rather, it's an inspirational, aspirational target that all the countries involved are coalescing around. And I would just, right now, if you think about the European map, we have Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, UK, and of course the European Commission. There are a number of countries in the room that are represented, and there's been discussions about efforts in your countries. We would love to have you join the Carbon Management Challenge. We want to grow this effort. We're going to have a first meeting of governments at the COP next week. Feel free to come up to me, and Adam Wong, my colleague at the Department of Energy here in the front row, also talk to him. We'd be happy to get you involved.
Thank you, Brad. And talking about international collaboration, I was really enthused to read about the recent US-China collaboration announcement, which has specific targets for carbon management for CCS. Could you just give us a little bit of your take about that agreement?
Well, I was very excited as well. I participated in that earlier era of engagement with China on carbon management. There are others in the room that did as well, and I think some of us look back on that time with a lot of worrying anxiety about what has happened, especially in the bilateral relationship between the United States and China, but arguably between China and countries represented here as well. And I think it's fair to say that the US-China relationship is one of the most important bilateral relationships in the world. We went into those discussions with the premise that carbon management is one of the more positive areas for the US and China to work together. Part of the goal, obviously, is to advance carbon management, but there's a broader goal that matters for all of us, which is to restore a more regular kind of relationship that with all the ups and downs in the news of the world, you have continuous cooperation at a working level. And I think the agreement that was made in California between President Biden and President Xi provides that opportunity. I'm particularly excited about the goal on carbon management because we were involved behind the scenes on that. And for those who haven't seen it, the United States and China will collaborate on the development of up to 5 commercial scale carbon management projects each. So that's 10 or more, excuse me. And it's for both energy and industrial emissions, which if you think about the coal fleet in China, it's not just an industrial discussion, it's also power. And so we're going to be engaging across the board. I was in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago for an Asia-Pacific and economic cooperation event. And this was a day after the announcement. And there were Asian and American and European companies represented there that were coming up to me and asking me how we were going to proceed with these commercial, partnering on these commercial scale projects. And we're already engaged at the staff level, thinking that through with our Chinese counterparts. I'll be making a trip early next year to China, actually hoping that we'll be firming some agreements that create the mechanism for this cooperation.
Thank you. And as you said, in these challenging, shall we say, geopolitical times, it's wonderful to see collaboration on climate because climate crisis is not sort of going away. So it was, for me, really great to see.
And inspiring for me as well.
It is inspiring. I know that you are going to Dubai this evening with Adam, and a number of us from this audience will also be going to Dubai for the COP28. As a final question, are you optimistic about COP28? And in addition to carbon management, what do you hope to see? What do you think, well, what I'll say hope to see out of COP28?
Well, I am encouraged, and I think speaking personally, but also our government's perspective, we are not as skeptical about the United Arab Emirates and the region hosting the COP. We see there are opportunities there that it's bringing the oil and gas producing countries to the table. There's a lot of innovation happening in the UAE and even in Saudi Arabia in recent years. And this puts a spotlight on them, both to show what they believe they're doing, but also pressure in a positive way to do more. So on that front, I see this COP as helping to, kind of in the same spirit of the Carbon Management Challenge, further legitimize carbon management in that global climate arena. The other thing that's separate from what we've been talking about here, but obviously vitally important, is this COP should really deliver some gains on methane mitigation, which is, especially in the oil and gas sector, our nearest, most cost-effective climate solution in terms of bringing down the pace of warming in the near term. And I think we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in financial commitments for methane mitigation between now and 2030. So that's exceedingly important. I guess the other thing that I'm hoping for, which is outside the COP process but tied to it, is we need real scope 1, 2, and 3 commitments from the oil and gas industry. And because the Emiratis are hosting, they are putting pressure on oil and gas companies, especially national oil and gas companies, to step up. I don't think it'll be enough, but I do think it'll be an important start. And if you look at the global south, the discussion on carbon management is not just about the hard-to-abate sectors. It's a much more comprehensive conversation. And I think that will be reflected in, the commitments won't go far enough, but at least we'll start to see some concrete commitments, and that's important.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for this open and frank discussion.
Thank you,
May I invite a round of applause for Brad? And could I invite Henriette for the next panel? Thank you.
Good morning to you all, and warm welcome to the panel Going Global, Fostering International Cooperation and Accelerating Deployment. My name is Henriette Nesheim. I work in the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, and I'm also a co-lead of the SEM CCUS initiative. SEM is the Clean Energy Ministerial, and it's a global process to accelerate clean energy deployment with currently 30 member countries around the world, representing today 90% of all clean energy investments globally across technologies. SEM represents a platform where governments and key stakeholders can work together. And one of the initiatives under SEM, which is the CCUS initiative, 15 governments have decided to work together to deploy carbon capture, use and storage at strategic, regulatory and policy level. And Norway, Saudi Arabia, the UK and the US sits on the leadership team today. So the situation around us now is that we have an upcoming COP and a global stocktake, and we are far from being on track on climate action. And yesterday we heard about the IEA report. And although we all experience strong momentum on CCS, we see that we are quite flat when it comes to actual deployment of projects. So in this panel today, we will explore the role of international cooperation in accelerating CCS and CCUS deployment. And I'm very happy to present the esteemed panel. So with me here today, I have Willy Coetzee, who is the Director for Government Relations and Business Development at Honeywell. I have Ruth Herbert, the CEO of Carbon Capture and Storage Association. I have Steve Kelly, President of 1.5 International, and Jan Tørlin, Director for Technologies and Partnerships at Heidelberg Materials. So I think we will dive into 3 main sections in this panel. First, we will look at why international cooperation is important. And then we will look at how we can enhance international cooperation and make it a success, or whether there are missing pieces. And thirdly, we will look at how the European Union can add value, including beyond its borders. So if we go into the first part, you all represent a different viewpoint or a place in the value chain or a business association. So I would like to ask each of you, why is international collaboration important from your viewpoint and your perspective? Starting with you.
Okay. I mean, ultimately, we need to recognize we're sitting with a global issue, right? It's not a European issue, it's not a US issue, it's a global problem. And you know, the phrase divide and conquer comes to mind. I don't think we can afford to have tunnel vision. I don't think we can afford to work individually. We need to leverage the experience that we have on a global level, and we need to work towards a common goal, right? And therefore, we don't have any alternative than to collaborate internationally and have one mind about the issue, really, and create those global platforms and support structures to solve the global issue.
Mm. And what about you, Ruth?
Yeah, I think building on that, we all breathe the same air. This is an issue for humanity. If we're looking at 3 degrees, or dare I say more, then this is, you know, it's existential to us, and we need to work together to overcome that. I think also just looking at this, say from the position of our members, which are active around the world, trying to develop and deploy projects, we're trying to do an awful lot in a very short space of time now. We've left this all rather late. We have now, thankfully, a lot of countries have binding targets, and they have to look at this seriously. Some still, you know, in the kind of strategizing phase, but for those of us deploying, I think it's very clear there's such a lot to do in a short space of time, and therefore we have to do anything possible to speed that up. Sharing knowledge, information, standards, these things will make deployment faster and more effective. So I think really that's the goal, collaboration to speed up deployment.
What about you, Steve? Do you have a...
Thank you. I'm going to give a sort of a technical answer in a way, which is that my company is very focused on direct air capture, so carbon removals, and the nature of that is that it can take place anywhere. It's location agnostic. Wherever you remove it, it's going to be impactful for the whole global community, and the places where it's most logical to put the direct air capture aren't necessarily the locations that are emitting CO2. So it's inherent in the technical aspect of what we're trying to do that international cooperation is necessary. The locations where there is demand for removals are not necessarily the places where removals are most logical to take place. And that automatically requires cooperation in terms of policy, in terms of ensuring that investment can take place in the locations where it makes the most sense to build the direct air capture plants, but also to facilitate the removal credits or whatever it is, whatever product it is that you're going to make from that direct air capture to transfer to the locations that need the removals.
And Jan?
Yes, I'm with Heidelberg Materials. We are a global company. And obviously, we have a target to become carbon neutral by 2050. But we are going most fast in North America and Europe, obviously, because there the system is most, I would say, supportive to it. But looking into Europe, we are in several countries. We like in Belgium, in France, and in Germany. North France, especially, we rely on storage outside the country. So there's not the storage, there are emissions in the country. Our plans are there for local customers with local raw materials, so we are a very localized business, but the storage opportunities are not there. So automatically there will be an international setting to it, and it was addressed yesterday also a lot. So infrastructure to reach those countries, and preferably pipeline infrastructure to make it also affordable from our emitting plants towards Denmark, towards Norway, towards UK. That needs a lot of international collaboration. So that's unavoidable for us. And it's also very interesting because to work over countries, it gives a very nice dynamics. And we are attracting a lot of engineers and business developers who like to work in it because it's a nice opportunity to really contribute to this transformation.
Yeah, we just heard Brad Crabtree also talk about the COP and the carbon management challenge, and I was thinking about you, Ruth, that represent the business association. What do you think about of the impact of an initiative like global carbon management? How can countries eventually collaborate to implement the challenge?
Yeah, so I've seen, you know, over the last few COPs, the coalitions of the willing on various issues coming forward, and I think they actually deliver a lot in terms of enabling countries to share their problems and challenges as well as their aspirations, and to actually kind of embolden sometimes the civil servants, being an ex-civil servant myself, you know, who are grappling with really challenging issues for public policy. You know, we talked about public perception and so forth and societal acceptance, but beyond that, kind of how do we fund this stuff? You know, who pays for it? How do we make sure it's safe? All of these questions for policymakers, and to actually be able to sort of have a safe space to share those concerns and work out, you know, are there things we can cut and paste, to be crude, and things that have already been done that can really help to accelerate this. So I think they're really valuable. I think where those initiatives can also harness the support of business as well and enable businesses to share information and ideas as well, I think they could really be powerful in terms of driving action on the ground as well. So yeah, I think really positive. And just to come really to what Jan said, I think this sort of system planning that needs to be happening in Europe, that there are other regions where that would be useful as well. There are other regions where several countries are going to need to maybe come together and look at different routes for CO2 and hydrogen and so forth. So actually kind of sharing how we're doing that with other regions would be really positive.
Very good. I was going to ask you, Willie, you are very much a technology-driven company, and you're doing a lot within capture technologies and also within utilization. So there is sometimes we say that we have to collaborate more, but there is also a competitive side. What are the limits of the competitive sectors, and how can international collaboration, on the other hand, advance technology developments?
Well, let me start with the latter, right? I think we need to be really open to leveraging that international experience. And it was such a great segue, you know, with Brad being up just in front of us from the DOE. We actually have a great relationship with the DOE as well. And in the US, you know, maybe let me mention one example. We are currently running a FEED project with the DOE for our advanced solvent carbon capture technology, which is a post-combustion technology, which has fantastic promise in terms of the energy efficiency, the cost of capture, right? Now, I would love for our folks and colleagues at the DOE in the US and our European colleagues and our UK colleagues to engage, right, and learn from one another. I think that's a key mechanism where we can learn and leverage that learning. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? Technology works the same whether you're in the US or in Europe. So then if I can also just maybe mention a couple of examples again to make it real of where we've seen success in terms of collaboration and getting around that issue of the competition. Two technologies come to mind, right? The first one is our eco-fining technology, which is renewable fuels technology. And I actually just had a discussion yesterday with our colleagues from Eni in Italy. And this technology was actually developed with Eni, right? And demonstrated with them. And it's been a pivotal success for us. We've licensed more than 40 units in that technology. The first commercial flight on 100% SAF was run with United Airlines in the US 2021 based on that technology, right? So it's a great success story. And then closer to the CO2 story, we have a technology called methanol to olefins, MTO, and it is the centerpiece for our CO2 to sustainable aviation fuel technology. And that technology is built on tried and tested tech, but it all started with MTO. And MTO we actually developed in part with Total Energies. So there's a piece in there that we developed with Total Energies. So just, I mean, the message is there's proof in the pudding, right? It's possible to do it. Now, yes, there are concerns in terms of IP. There's concerns in terms of competition. We need to be very sensitive to that. I think from the government side, we need to understand as well that there needs to be a respect for that type of IP of companies, because you put in a lot of R&D and resources into that, but it can be overcome. It's widely a very positive story.
Looking at you, Jan, I mean, you touched upon it when in your first question that cement is a localized production, and you represent Heidelberg is a multinational company. So, how do you have a profit from operating in various parts of the world?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think I will give some examples where we really benefit that we are active in multiple countries. Obviously, we are the cement producer in Norway, and being in Norway, where the government has been very, very supportive to develop carbon capture, we had a lot of learnings. So yesterday there was a lot of discussion about FIDs, that FID should come. We took FID 3 years ago, and by the end of the year, we are commissioning, at the end of next year, we are commissioning the full-scale 400,000 ton capture unit in Norway. That is, of course, fantastic for Norway, but it's also fantastic for all the projects that we develop later on, because all our engineers and business developers, they go to learn from our colleagues in Norway, how has it been developed, what is the technology, how was the relation with the government, how did you deal with stakeholder acceptance, how did you get your permits done. So there's a lot of learnings of one project in one country, and I think most of our projects that we have in the pipeline have meanwhile visited our Brevik plant 1 or 2 times. Another example is we got in Mitchell in the US a DOE funding for developing a storage location very close to our plant size. And we have done some seismic shootings in the last months, and we'll drill a well, appraisal well, in the beginning of next year. And this is to develop a saline aquifer, but we are developing also saline aquifers with our partners in Eastern Europe. So we are now taking our partners from Eastern Europe to take the learnings from our work in Mitchell, supported by DOE. So that's a fantastic example of really down the ground knowledge exchange. And this is the benefit if you are on multiple locations, multiple countries, different speed of development, and you leverage on it. And I think this is the strength of a multinational.
Mm. Yeah, and Steve, you touched upon it, but maybe you can explain once again the international dimension of direct air capture. Where would you see the best locations, for instance, or are you based mainly in the US at the moment?
So we certainly our initial plant rollout is in the US. We've got all the characteristics that are needed. We've got strong government support. We've got just ourselves. We have 6 gigatons plus of storage capacity that we've already got tied up in the Texas, Louisiana Gulf Coast. So we've got a lot of running room for deployment of the technology in the US. The climate, sort of the warmth and humidity is there, which is the ideal location for it. We've got access to surplus zero emissions power. So the things that we look for in international locations are access to zero emissions power in excess of what's needed for other uses, geologic storage capacity, of course, relatively benign climate conditions are helpful and not essential. It's a location agnostic technology, but it benefits in warmer climates. The skilled resources, the kind of places where typically oil and gas has been operational, also carries the same kind of construction capabilities, the skill sets around understanding the geologic storage and so on. And for the current generation of the technology that we deploy, which is the carbon engineering liquid sorbent technology, It utilises natural gas in the calcination process, so we need access to natural gas as well. So those are the kind of things from a technical standpoint we look for. And then, of course, supportive government policy is essential as well to allow projects to go off the ground. I'll just mention briefly that you know, my remit within the business is to find locations outside of the US to deploy. So we are very focused on that, and the first sort of major sort of step forward that we've taken is in fact in the UAE, where we have an MOU with ADNOC, and we're doing feasibility work now on deployment of DAC technology in the UAE, and also bidirectional investment us into their sequestration hubs that they're developing, and likewise for the UAE to invest in the US as well.
Interesting. Yeah, let's move to the second part. I mean, how can we enable and enhance further the international cooperation, and are there any pitfalls here? So, if I move first to you, Jan, we often hear about that there is a need for public procurement of clean cement and so on, and including with the CCUS. And I was wondering, what is your take on that? Is there a well-functioning market for cement today, or demand for clean cement? Yeah.
Yeah, let me say, public procurement is a very important instrument, and we are advocating this a lot, and we are quite sure this will play a significant role going forward. However, we cannot wait for this. And so we will have, as I said, with our plant in Brevik, we will commission it end of next year. So at the beginning of 2025, we will have fully decarbonized cement on the market. And this morning, we launched our commercialization campaign. So you can now buy or sign up for Evo Zero cement, manufactured in Brevik. And there will be developers for which the carbon neutral attribute of that kind of cement, which for the rest has exactly the same properties as a normal produced cement, will create an added value for their business. And in this way, we can commercialize the value for developers and for society about the carbon neutral building material, a building material that will be needed. And that's a commercialization step that we have launched this morning. So this morning there was a press release and a website on it. So the order book is now open. And we will see how this private, that's not public procurement, that's private procurement, how it will also help for public tendering to step on this. And we think it's a very important additional pillar towards funding, as the commercial value of carbon neutral building materials is to be recognized.
And now, Steve, you were talking about direct air capture in different countries. Are there any shortcomings in international collaboration that can enhance more international collaboration on that?
First, let me just illustrate what's good in international collaboration. We're building the first megaton scale direct air capture plant right now. It's going to be construction complete by the end of next year. It'll be fully operational mid-2025. It's an international collaborative effort. This is Canadian technology. It's being built in the United States. It's creating jobs in the local communities in Texas. We're selling removal credits globally. So we have Japanese airlines, ANA, Airbus, Amazon. You know, we've got a long list of people who are stepping up and purchasing removal credits on the voluntary market. So the building blocks are there for this to be an international effort. The other important aspect is it's a global supply chain. So in fact, you know, there's a substantial amount of the equipment that's actually coming from here in Europe. So this is, even if these plants are being built elsewhere, there are opportunities to participate in the supply chain. So if there's an enhancement in international collaboration, it's to be able to sort of formalize those, move the voluntary purchases towards compliance market purchases, and facilitating the international transfer of the product, whether it's removals or in fact, you know, utilization of the CO2 further down the line. But that sort of being able to recognize the technical aspect of removals can take place anywhere. The demand can be somewhere completely different. Let's get the policy framework in place to allow the removals to cross borders as well.
Mm. Yeah, and that goes directly over to you, Ruth. I mean, CCSA has status as a UNFCCC NGO. So how do you think we can get up to speed in creating more global carbon markets?
Yeah, I mean, so every year we take a delegation of our members there. We work with our partners, other NGOs and organisations in the international space to really help to raise awareness of the opportunities for CCUS, what's happening in Europe and elsewhere, and share those lessons. And I think there's a number of different things here. So I think what we're starting to see, so in the past this has been a lot about trying to overcome some of those public policy questions. You know, does it work? Is it safe? How much does it cost? Will people support it? Increasingly, it's more about, so how do you, as an association, which we do, bring together the end users of the technology in the power and industrial sectors with the transport providers, whether that's ships or pipes or rail, with the storage providers? How do you make the full chain work? How do you get regulators who are not used to dealing with these kind of risks and commercial kind of entities to actually kind of adapt their processes to challenging project timescales, given the climate emergency, and sort of very much more practical issues now about how do we make this happen and quickly, and how do we do some of this infrastructure planning, right, across borders, and how do we get the most efficient CO2 transport and storage systems so that our industry is competitive compared to others around the world. And so we find that these questions are increasingly important. I'm speaking at Singapore Pavilion. They're interested in CO2 shipping. I'm speaking at, you know, different pavilions in different countries where I think everybody's looking at what is their role, what is their USP in this transition. How can they adapt their economies and make sure that there are jobs and growth from the transition for their people? So I think we're just seeing now, it feels kind of like a global race to corner these new low-carbon product markets. I think exactly what Jens talked about, whether it's fuels, whether it's clean cement, clean steel. I think people are now, countries are seeing that opportunity, and they're very keen to learn quickly, and they're going to cut and paste what's already been done elsewhere and try to leapfrog. And so that's exciting. That's exciting for the fact that we might get a momentum that actually means we can save humanity and we can get a truly global market on this. I guess the reflection then back to what some may say is the leaders in this in Europe, you know, that has moved much earlier on this, and in the US as well, is making sure that, you know, we're very clear about where we want to, you know, be in that market as a region. But I think there is a lot of knowledge to share, and things like the standards, the ISO on CO2 stream composition for pipelines, for example, huge piece of work, involved our members from around the world, is going to be really important standard for projects everywhere. So getting behind these standards, developing them, improving them continuously with learning and using them in projects around the world, I think will speed up deployment.
Thank you. And what do you, Willie, would like to see further developed in international cooperation in the years ahead?
Well, I think, with every new national strategy that comes out, it's becoming more clear that really we're dealing with global supply chains, right? And global supply chains means that we need to recognize that different regions need to play to different strengths. The EU, what works in the EU is not necessarily applicable to the US, it's not applicable to India, it's not applicable necessarily to Africa, right? Yesterday we heard one of the panelists talk about book and claim systems and how we need to think about that, right? How do we enable this global supply chain? Now, I think what I would really want to see is, firstly, I'm a big proponent of always starting with why. Understand why you're doing something, right? And that really drives you. So I think we know why, but I'm a big proponent then at looking at what is the end game. And if we look at these enabling systems like book and claim systems and carbon accounting, the end game is essentially to decrease drastically our carbon intensity of our world, right? Now, I believe that we need to leave the how to the industry, right? We'll figure it out, the market will figure it out, and focus on the carbon intensity and thereby enable industry to really have these global supply chains and work on the carbon intensity of our energy supply chains instead of being extremely prescriptive in terms of how we actually do that. There's a lot of legislation currently that we have the ability to leverage to do that, like the Net Zero Industry Act. A lot of strategies being updated in Europe as well. And hopefully, we'll see that there's a gradual migration to being less prescriptive, less constraining, and more enabling.
Thank you. Yeah, and let's now turn to the EU and to ask you more about what is your take on how the EU can add value internationally beyond the EU. So I'll start with you, Jan, and ask you, is the EU strict regulatory regime a competitive advantage or a disadvantage compared to other regions in the world? As a multinational, you have a multi-experience, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's definitely supportive because, we are a commercial entity and you have to bring profit in the company. And if the regulatory scheme is such that there is either a carrot or a stick that supports it, then it's also easier to explain to your shareholders. And just for doing good, companies cannot work. So, and just I mentioned about our project in Brevik, which was supported more by Norway, of course, than the EU. But I'll come to this. With this project, we can supply enough cement to build all the residential houses in Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, and Belgium. Yeah? But that's not enough. We want to decarbonize all constructions in Europe, in all countries, in all sectors, not only residential houses, but every construction. And for that, we need more projects. The EU has worked very well in terms of R&D funding. We have benefited from several projects to develop our capture technology with funding programs from the EU. Then with the combination from the free allowances coming down and the CBAM going up and the instrument of the EU Innovation Fund, we can do another round of first-of-a-kind projects. And, but we want to decarbonize them all. And in order to decarbonize them all, we would need one more step from the EU. Because our free allowances will go down, and due to CBAM, the cost will be able to convert to the customer because we cannot deliver so fast CCS projects as the free allowances will go down. So I've calculated that our company, until 2035, will pay 15 billion euro on ETS credits. This is not a problem, because due to CBAM, all competitors will face the same costs, and all the competitors will turn that to their cement price. And yesterday also, the manager from Open Grid Europe mentioned, if that money is not used, then in 2040, we will still have carbon-rich cement, and all the money will just be transferred to the customer. So we are lacking one instrument, is that this money which we pay for ETS credits, that this is re-injected to make feasible business cases for all CCS plants that we need. So roughly, we think that 50% of our emission till 2040 in Europe has to be dealt with by carbon capture. And the projects we do now is the low-hanging fruit. These are either in countries with a very high supportive scheme or a plant which is at a coastal location. For example, our plant in Peterswood in the UK is supported by the government, and it's very clear near to the coast. But a lot of inland plants, they don't have that situation. So if we want to decarbonize the cement industry completely, we will need funding support until the very last plant will be decarbonized. And the money for that, we collect from our customers, and we will transfer to the ETS. But there is not yet a loop how to re-inject that money into decarbonization. So that's our last wish from the EU.
Okay. I hope there are someone from the Commission here to take notes. What about you, Willie? Do you have a view on how do you see the EU going forward?
Well, I think one of the EU strengths is creating very careful, well-structured regulation, and there's really an important place for that, right? But I think what needs to be really nailed is also getting that into execution, right? And again, learning from others in terms of how do we actually do. Now, the Net Zero Industry Act and the Greater Green Deal Industrial Plan, I think, is a great step in that direction, right? It could be pivotal. If we get it right, if we make sure that that piece of legislation optimally supports implementation of projects, supports the value chain, so we can get the ball rolling, right? We're going to learn a lot from implementing, and then we can transfer that quite effectively back to the rest of the world. And if I look at regions like Europe and the US, for example, I always have this mental picture of taking a pebble and throwing it into a pond, right? And what we do here is going to create that ripple effect throughout the rest of the world, right? There's a lot of regions that are lagging, and they're looking towards us in terms of what we're doing and how we're getting to the end goals, right? So we have an extremely important place to play to set that example and create those ripples that are positive and not constraining.
Thank you. What about you, Steve? You are based in the US, but how do you think the EU can add value, and where can other parts of the world learn from the EU?
Well, very briefly, the EU can take the lead in something that's really important for us in the removals space, which is removals are going to be, everyone recognizes removals are going to be needed after the low-hanging fruit has been achieved, and they want the removals to be there in 2040, 2045. For that to happen, we have to be deploying now. They will not just magically appear in the last part of this journey. So integrate removals into compliance systems now, or as soon as possible, so that we can start that sort of the migration from a voluntary market basis of what we're doing to a compliance market basis. That's my ask.
Thank you. Yeah, we're running short of time, maybe? No?
Yeah.
Ruth?
Very quickly then.
Final
So very quickly,
yeah.
I think the things that the EU does, really good regulation and so forth, exactly what Steve said, but I think very quickly, I think things like the CBAM, for example, they do have an impact, obviously, beyond the EU. So really leading in that kind of legislation is driving places like Morocco to think about CCUS, for example. So the ripples go wide. Also, I think we just have to show that you can go on the decarbonisation journey without deindustrialising. And we need to show that to developing countries, that they can see that actually we can have a just transition and we can have industry and decarbonisation. If there isn't, though, that funding, whether it's Commission level, whether it's at national level for deployment, so from innovation funding to deployment funding, if we don't get that, then I'm afraid there won't be industry to to decarbonise in Europe. So I think that we're in a critical moment now. We need to now pick up the pace in terms of those decisions around project funding.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you so much for the panel. And this panel clearly showed that we need to do the global thing and we need to go global. Unfortunately, there's this one small problem that well, I mean, to be honest, it's slightly nerdy that CO2 is not CO2. So in some way, we need to start discussing, I mean, what would be the standard for that and how can you actually transport the CO2 across borders into pipeline and combine them. And the next panel is really focusing on golden standard. Do we need a European approach to CO2 quality? It might sound nerdy, but it's extremely important that we get this right. So the moderator for this will be Harold from Wintershall, and he has, again, another excellent panel. So Harold, please bring your panel.
Thank you. Yeah, very good morning. Welcome, everyone. Basically, now it's got a little bit more technical. My name is Harald Gladlik, and I want to talk about a little bit today about CO2 specifications and if we need one for whole Europe. Basically, when we talk about CO2 specifications, which is basically the chemical composition of our fluid, it gets quite technically interesting. That's quite at the heart of a CCS project. So if you have a special or certain specification, you basically open some doors and you close some doors. So if you have you would prefer, for example, some modes of transportation, or you basically prefer others. So you do unintended and intended actions just by setting this special specification. Due to this, we, or the Zero Emissions Platform, set up the CCUS Forum Expert Group for the CO2 specification early in this year. That's where I'm coming from. I was one of the co-chairs, and we elaborated on that with a technical team and issued a report which you can download from the website of the European Commission. Basically, what turned out for me, the key message was basically there is no silver bullet. So there is no golden standard. So in the end, we will have the need for a compromise on every side, and to find something where everyone can live with, more or less. Basically, yeah, and we want to discuss what. So the question is, do we need a standard for Europe, and do we need one standard or two standards or three standards, or do we need no standard? And for that, I would like to discuss that today with the panelists here, which I would introduce. Here to my left is Brian Larsen from Danish Standards. Happy to welcome David Juul from NSOC, Annemarie Manga from the Aramis project, and Katerina, Sadi from Energia Greece. Welcome. David, I've got the first question for you, and just for a starter, could you elaborate a little bit what's technically the difference, or the most important differences between gas transport, which we know quite well, and CO2 transport when it comes to pipeline transportation?
Thank you very much, Harold, and thank you very much also for the opportunity to be here in this panel, in this very interesting discussion about standards for CO2. I work for NSOC. NSOC is the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas. It was created by the third energy package, which means that most of the tasks that NSOC performs are coming from regulation, European regulation. NSOC's members, the European Gas Transmission System Operators, or TSOs, operate more than 2,000 kilometers of pipelines for transmission networks. We believe that the infrastructure is an enabler for the energy transition, and whether it is decarbonized or renewable gases like biomethane, hydrogen, but also CO2, the infrastructure will play a major role, and TSOs are supporting the energy transition. And so TSOs are very committed to transform their networks to flow these kind of gases, including CO2. And there's a big contribution that TSOs, gas TSOs, can bring to these discussions also for CO2, because there are indeed, as you say, resemblances between flowing CO2 and flowing natural gas, but there are also very important differences between the two. In terms of the models that are needed for the CO2 pipelines, I will not go much into that, but if we consider a EU approach for the CO2 transport networks, I think that an open access to the networks is key. So having a third-party access to the pipelines is key. Although, of course, if we have more local projects, we can have a less regulated approach and a more private approach to it. But when we are talking about TPA, detailed rules such as interoperability rules and also standards at European level, with some flexibility, of course, but standards are key. Then, of course, in terms of the complexity coming from CO2, transporting CO2, that is different from transporting gas or even hydrogen, considering that CO2, there are around 28 relevant quality parameters versus natural gas with 12, 13 for hydrogen as well, 12, 13 relevant parameters, which shows a bit the complexity of transporting CO2 versus natural gas.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that quite already at the, I mean, what's the difference is, maybe Annemarie, you could tell us a little bit what, I mean, how did you in the Armies project, how did you set the specification, and what kind of stakeholders did you take into account, and what was your general idea setting the standards?
Well, thank you for the question. I have joined the Armies project half a year ago, so when setting the standards, I wasn't there. But coming from an emitter side and now looking at the part for the project which we're looking at, I can see that there's lots of work and also lots of discussion on the standards. We have publicized our standards on our website. We are a trunk line of 200 kilometers providing CO2 to multiple stores. So open access from a store's perspective and also open access from a emitter's perspective. But by having that length of pipeline, we are going into dense phase CO2. And that is a different connotation and physical state than the gaseous ones, and that are mostly onshore, and that can be used for near shore applications offshore as well. But the chemistry is different, and the main risk for us is that sulfuric acid is generated in these pipelines, which are carbon steel. So our prime concern is those specs on NOx and SOx and water to avoid safety risks. And hence we have set quite stringent specifications. Some of our emitters really struggle with it. But yeah, safety is to be essential, and we do want to have it stored for a long time. So also from a storage perspective, it's essential to keep these stringent specs. But of course, if you have an open access with less stringent specs, then it will become a problem for us or for the emitter. I don't think all of the solutions have been found yet. So
yeah.
It's a dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to have your take on questions that I really don't know why. I mean, we have several projects in Europe, yeah, and they all have different specs. How come?
Well, I'm a chemical engineer by background, so I look first at the technical constraints. So this technical constraint of a pipeline which is at high pressure, low temperature, is different from a shipping solution, and is different from a gaseous perspective. So going back from the corrosion perspective, that gives different connotations and needs from that angle. Looking from an emitter perspective, my background is in the steel industry. I think that has one of the most complex emission profiles on pollutants. So there you would want, from an emitter perspective, to have a more relaxed spec, because the amount of cleaning that you have to do in your capture part is huge. So I think there's a lot of policy part to it, and I'm not a policy maker per se, but my plea would be not to forget about the technical part, to come up with some kind of average which will not be working for anyone. So keep looking at the safety part.
Thank you. When we talk about the different specs of different basically projects, I would like to come to you, Brian. How does it? What's the drawbacks and what's the pluses standardization could have for a single member state and for the European Union?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to make a disclaimer. I represent Danish standards, but we actually don't make Danish standards. We make European standards at a minimum, or preferably global standards. Furthermore, we don't make them, but our members do. So in order to answer your question, I would like to talk about sockets and adapters. I mean, every one of us in this room has been traveling and wanting to adapt or charge our phone, and we cannot charge it because we need to use the local solution. Now, I think we need to ask ourselves, how many sockets and different adapters do we want on the carbon market? If we look at CO2 storage, I mean, we would at a minimum be looking at a European market. And if we look at utilization, it would be a global market, because of course aeroplanes and ships will be going global. So I really think that we should aim at making European standards and not national standards. Of course, there will be needs for flexibility, and what is the balance of that? That is a discussion, but of course, if we make standards, we can lower cost, we can increase efficiency and transparency. You have at an ISO level, the global level, you have 13 standards regarding carbon, and you have one for quality that is being revised at the moment. It operates with a purity level of 95%, and now we actually have just decided to start a new European committee that will work on CCUS standards, and I think there's a German project in the pipeline with collaboration from Denmark and other countries that operates with a purity level of 99.5. Maybe not that you know much about.
Yeah, basically I'm part of that. We revised that, and we're right now much lower. Basically, this is a German standard with input from every neighboring countries, plus Norway and UK. And but we are not at 99.5 anymore.
I'm glad to hear that. But then again, do you need the same purity level when you store as when you want to utilize? And can you send the same quality in the pipelines? I mean, there's a lot of questions that the market needs to solve, and then we have the standards very soon, at least to support the market.
Yeah. Would you hope for different standards for CO2, CCS and CCU?
Well, I'm actually not a technical expert. I'm more like a facilitator. So the question is that whatever works for the market and whatever makes the market go more smooth would be preferred. And then, of course, you need to find out, should it be the emitter that purifies, or should it be the utilizer? Where do we clean the carbon? Where do we wash the carbon?
Yeah. That gives me a little bit, basically the idea coming to you, Katarina. I mean, you're basically working for a project in Greece, CCS project, and what do you expect? I mean, this is from the, let's say, North Sea perspective, a little bit away. So what are your potential markets, and do you see the need to connect to the North Sea market in somehow?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and thank you very much also for the organizers for this invitation. Indeed, I represent the only storage facility located in the most southeast part of Europe. This is Prino CO2. We saw it yesterday in the PCI list. So given its location and the fact that its time is also important, this is an issue that I would like to highlight. This facility is meant to be operational before 2030. So first customers, it's being developed as a full open TPA access, open to third parties. So first customers are most likely to be customers from the region. Why? Because of cost. The facility will be receiving as a first stage liquid CO2, so de facto has to have most stringent standards as in relation to water. But on the other hand, we saw yesterday in the JRC maps that by 2035, this is going to be the end of the CO2 pipeline backbone. So the way we are seeing it, and we're witnessing now, and I'm thinking what David said, we're actually developing a CO2 internal market. And looking back from our experience in energy, I am sure that the driver for this internal market would be first of all, liquidity, competitiveness, linking sources and sinks. It's not an easy exercise because we would need to strike a balance between interoperability on one hand and costs on the other hand, both for emitters, and we are planning for a consultation with potential emitters to hear their point of view. And also asset integrity. You've mentioned pipelines and CO2 traveling inside these pipelines. But in addition to pipelines, here we have one more element. This is storage. So we also need to address the fluid that is inside this storage place. We shall be injecting, in our case, it's an aquifer. We shall be injecting dense CO2, like Anne-Marie. The mixture has effect on the critical point, so it has effect on the actual conditions that we can maintain this to be dense. There are issues with we will have 2 or 3 phase flows. It's the flow per se, Joule-Thomson effect, flexibility, safety, and one more issue, it's criticality of materials, the casing of the injector wells. There needs to be special attention for corrosion, particularly when at the lower end where it reaches the aquifer. There's also a lot of concerns for cement integrity, carbonic acid being formed, leading to calcium carbonate, which could be good, but also to more carbonic acid. We're looking at timescales that are long, timescales that can extend far longer than the actual lifetime of the project, because once the project, at some point, the storage facility will be full, it will be shut down, but still there is liability to maintain integrity, and these are also issues that need to be taken into account.
Yeah, talking about integrity, I mean, do you know how your project made sure this forever aspect, they call it, yeah? I mean, this 10,000 years in some countries and others, a little bit different. Did you show that experimentally? I mean, how did you do that? I mean, that the integrity is given for such a long time.
There have been a lot of studies, also in relation to plug and abandonment of CO2 injection wells, stemming both from the US and the UK and Norway. So this is one part that we are looking at while designing our facility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, maybe I want to go back a little bit to this European aspect, David. If we want to be interoperational, would we require something like a etiquette, so a network code or something like this?
So when we come from the experience of natural gas, and we have, third-party access, several players working together, several operators that are connected, adjacent operators that have that share a border, and then several network users that all of them need to work together to be able to flow in the case of natural gas networks, natural gas, And I think that the learnings that come from natural gas can also be applied for CO2 if we want to develop this European perspective for the CO2 networks, which I think it's the way for us to be able to achieve the decarbonization efforts that we would like to have. And so I believe that the set of detailed rules that are in place for natural gas should also be at least a source of inspiration for what comes for CO2 as well. So rules like how to deal with different gas qualities in borders, for example, because as we know, standards for gases are ranges. They are not on and off. They are not binary kind of standards. So there are ranges, and it is possible that adjacent operators use these ranges with some flexibility, and so some rules need to be applied how to deal with this. Additionally, rules for example, exchange of information between operators and between operators and network users come from the interoperability network code for gas, and this, I think, it will be also key for the CO2 development of pan-European networks.
So, yeah, sorry.
Can I be impolite and disagree on the parallels with natural gas? I think there are a lot of parallels, but there's also some differences. And clearly, I'm with Katarina on the technical constraints, and I think there's still unknowns on the technical constraints. There's a joint industry project being created to actually look at the corrosion perspectives. But the dilution part, I'm really a bit worried about that, because it would mean that if I were to accept various sources with various gas streams at the start of my trunk lane, I would need to put a food-grade CO2 producer on my site to actually be able to dilute it. And I think commercially that food-grade CO2 will not blend up with the components to the extent that I need. So for me, decentralized specification meeting is also very important, and it may not be as easy as the dilution of the natural gas part.
Yeah, but Annemarie, do you actually think that but how could we establish, let's say, a European spec if we want to have anything like this? Then, I mean, how would you technically do that?
Well, I think Katrina and I are coming from the same angle, saying, okay, this is what we need to do it safely, this is what needs to be met, and then we need to see where we resolve it.
But still, if I can jump in, I think there's a lot of work to be done until we reach, and if we reach consensus on a European standard. And we first need to see together storages, pipeline transporters and emitters, and understand very well where the constraints lie. Because as I said, for example, in the subsurface, you could have different constraints in relation to the actual subsurface that you are facing, and each emitter has his own constraints because of the process and the pre-combustion or post-combustion capturing. I'm sure that David can back me up on this, that NOV had spent together with several gas institutions and associations more than 15 or 20 years in an effort to reach a gas standard, which has not been a trivial exercise.
Yeah.
But yes, at least in my view, yes, we should try to work at least towards harmonization, because standards should not cause a barrier to entry. The ultimate goal should be the internal competitive liquid CO2 market, but getting there, I think it's a process. We're probably not ready yet.
Yeah. But talking about the emitters a little bit, I mean, the emitters are basically probably the most costly part of the value chain. How did you take their needs into account, or how could one take the needs into account? We're talking about reservoir and transport or transport medium integrity, but if we don't have enough emitters, we have a problem. Yeah, if it's getting too costly, simply. Anyone's got a take on this? But probably that's an open question.
A balance needs to be struck, and this is also would be the results of studies, parameter by parameter, these 28 parameters that David was actually mentioned.
Mm. So, 3 questions. Thank you.
It's 10 minutes left. Or maybe I can. Sorry. Maybe I can. I think we agree more than disagree when it comes to the standardization effort. I totally agree when Katarina says that it's been a big effort to develop the gas standard, and this is a bit the reason why the gas standard is used on a flexible manner throughout Europe. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of standard. The gas standard is a voluntary standard that can be used by member states, and some member states use it at the full extent. Some others use parts of the ranges there. And so I think that this can be also translated for CO2 and not have a too rigid approach when it comes to the standardization of CO2. I agree that that will probably not work. But then there is the interoperability to solve these situations, the detailed rules that I mentioned earlier that can then make things that are standardized at different levels, can make them work together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But in a way, I mean, if every country, national state has the right to set their own rule, we will actually break the transmission line. Yeah? I mean, if, or the option to transport from one country, for example, to the coast, possibly. I mean, is that something that you would also see, or can we circumvent that somehow?
I think there are ways to deal with that. I think the colleagues probably know better which ways we can deal with different specs of CO2 that then need to meet the specifications for the rest of the value chain, including the storage. This is a bit the exercise that is done for natural gas. CO2 is more complex, we all agree with that. But this is a bit the exercise where the whole network works together, although we can find, in some cases, different specifications for gas, depending on the local and regional specificities of a certain, for example, member state.
So sub-networks, so to speak.
Yeah, and this is very important to be able to have a security of supply for natural gas that is very welcome, and that we can get gas from several different sources with different specifications that then all come into the European gas networks, and that can then flow freely within borders, of course, having to have in place rules to be able to flow gas from one member state to the other.
Thank you, David. I just received questions from the audience. Yeah, so you're very much encouraged to ask questions. So wonderful. I'll just read it to us, and that's an open question to everyone then. Yeah? Without standards, transport will lack taking steps toward investments. Okay. Gas ships now have a lead time of 3 to 4 years. How can we balance the need to establish standards as soon as possible while maintaining flexibility and not lock in certain rules too soon? Yes.
Well, of course, we are looking at a market under development, and we have different interests. And that's, of course, obstacles in regards to creating common ground. But I think that we should aim at common standards. What you could do is that you can perhaps make them a bit broad or a bit flexible, so that you perhaps lower the ambition and the specifics in the standard, so that everybody can operate with them, perhaps with some local adjustment. And then I think you need to build on and be more specific as the market develops, and then we, of course, learn more. So I think that we should aim at the common ground, but perhaps make it so broad and flexible that everybody can see themselves in it.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I think one of the things that helps is to provide clarity. So for our project, we have put our standards on our website, both for gas and for liquid. So that is a guiding point for the emitters to see if they can meet it or not, or we need to have a dialogue. So transparency and having the dialogue across the value chain for me is really important.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. We have a second question. Would it be useful or restrictive to set minimum CO2 purity levels at EU level as suggested in N2IA text? In brackets, what purity level is to aim for and what is too much? So what is the balance between costs and risks? I mean, we touched that point a little bit already, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about costs of the value chain then. Anyone got a take on that?
I think in the end it's a trade-off between the various parts of the value chain and how pure the CO2 needs to be enabled to also make it make the whole value chain economically efficient, but never discarding things like safety, as was already mentioned, of course, and interoperability.
Yeah. Especially taking into account that in some member states it's still forbidden to inject CO2 into the ground. I think we basically need, at EU level would be best, but probably some at least bilateral communication. Otherwise, member states, these special member states, won't be in the position to actually discard or get rid of the CO2. Balance cost risks, and a little bit more. I mean, especially the project. I mean, what would be your take? I mean, how much more expensive does not in figures, but generally, how much more expensive does one of your projects get when you would try to be more general, so to speak, going to the emitter and saying, okay, we're fine and ready to accept worse quality, so to speak. What would be the consequence on your side?
I haven't done the calculations myself, but I have heard remarks from emitters that indeed variation of specs can make as much as a difference as 30 euros per ton or 40 euros per ton. But of course, these investments on the capture side are really big, and they vary a lot per industry. So some people already have the CO2 at a very pure specification, so there's zero cost to it, and for others it's more difficult. So it really is a general question with very specific answers.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And I think we have a last question, and I think we're running out of time. The CO2 specifications must follow the Water Framework Directive. If not, onshore injection will not be possible. Can you comment on that? Does that make sense? Probably.
Could you repeat?
Probably Brian, no?
No, sorry.
No, sorry. Anyone else? Water Framework Directive. I'm personally not an expert for that too, so I'm sorry.
I'm not aware of the Water Framework Directive. I do know the water spec for us, 10 ppm, but not sure how that incorporates in the Water Framework Directive, to be honest.
Yes, I'm afraid me neither. Our field is offshore.
Sorry, whoever wrote that, I'm sorry for that. Basically, I think we're at the end of our time, and I would like to thank you as panelists for the nice discussion, and thank you for listening.
I told you there were some important facts that we needed to take care of before we could move on to the market. 28, was that the number on difference? Yeah, well, good. now we have come to the final panel, and we have sort of been down many, many different routes. We have looked at transport, we have looked at storage, we used at use, we used all the different components, and we're now trying to sort of bring it back all together, because I mean, if we need to do something, I mean, we need all hands on deck, and we especially need to sort of have some initiative going. I think that has been sort of a recurring theme in all of the other discussion. So for the final panel, we sort of gathered people that would be able to actually pull off some industry initiative. And we have Chris Davis from CCUS Europe to moderate. So Chris, please bring your panel on stage.
It's all right, it's okay, it'll fall off. Yeah. Well, you can take it. Right, okay, let's to business. Industrial initiative. Well, there hadn't been enough of it, has there? Because clearly last year at Oslo, we didn't have a single final investment decision for a CCS project. Now we have two final investment decisions taken, and we need dozens and dozens and dozens, so we need a lot more initiative. I'm Chris Davis. I'm Director of CEO of CCS Europe, which is a political advocacy group. Some of you know also that back in 2008, I took the CO2 storage directive through the Parliament. So 16 years later, I'm hoping next year we will actually see that directive put to some sort of practical use. So that's going to be good news. But I have to tell you that last year at Oslo, there was a general agreement that the forum should support the creation of an industrial alliance, an industrial partnership body with the Commission. Well, I spent 17 years in 2 different parliaments, and, you know, I'm not convinced by that idea. I want to be convinced. I haven't made up my mind. How should I vote? Now, Rodolphe here. Rodolphe was one of the co-authors of a paper that was put forward as a result of that decision to suggest how an industrial partnership might be formed. I take it, Rodolphe, that you are therefore strongly in favour of the creation of such a body.
Yes, yes, thank you for having me. Definitely, I'm here on my quality of the co-author of this work under the CCUS forum. That was one of the 3 first working groups that has been created. So we were 3 with 3 co-authors, with my colleague Rob van der Meer from Sun Bureau and Winston Beck from Heidelberg Materials on behalf of ZEP. We have organized 5-6 meetings, calls, being able to gathering more than 60 people, representatives from different organizations. The first question was, do we need one? Do we need one industrial partnership for this, for CCUS in particular? It was not only a majority, but almost a unanimity at the end. Then the question was how to design that, because as a representative of the industry, I mean, I've been part of many of those industrial partnerships or organization undertaking at different level. Some of them are very efficient, impactful. Some others need to make some progress, obviously. We took some inspiration from the biomethane industrial partnership. We made a proposal, and the focus was clear on how to make it fly. But the question is, well, now we need to be up to the task. CCUS is not a news. It still has to now to be implemented. And we need to move to really to the next level. It's a full-time job needed. We probably need a secretariat to be in place to pay attention to the different levels of complexities that we have to deal with. But it's not anymore a news, CCS. I mean, we need to move to the next level now. And I think on this we have a general agreement.
Well, yeah, but we all want to bang the drum. You know, we want the Commission to wake up at the highest possible level and say, you know, we've got to drive CCS forward. But you know what happens? You know, the bodies get set up and junior officials get sent along and it becomes just a talking shop.
I agree. This is what we are trying to avoid, obviously. But I think the Commission, regarding what has been announced yesterday by Commissioner Simson and also by Ditte Juul Jørgensen from the DG, I mean, to my point of view, the European Commission did the job. The ball now is on the other side of the, I would say, the fence, with the member states, with the industry leaders, with the civil society as well. We talked a lot about scalability. We talk a lot about social acceptance. We talk a lot about all the technical guidance, what we need to, go beyond and so on. We can do this work all together, obviously, but I would like at least 3-4 member states to speak up now and to continue the job that the European Commission has launched.
Okay. Bernard, oil and gas sector, enormously influential, terribly powerful. Exxon having spent vast sums of money denying the fact there was climate change for many years. So, but do you want a partnership? Do you need a partnership? Haven't you got the influence already?
Yeah, so thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me here in the first place. So it's a complex question. Of course, there are a multitude of partnerships already, right? So there are industry partnerships, as Rodolphe just mentioned, the IOGP or the OGCI, there's Gas Europe. There's a number of industry associations where already the industry is trying to get together to work through standardization, to work through specifications, to work through policy adjustments. So I think a lot of these industry associations are there and they're critical. They're not always just targeted at CCS, but a lot of them have a very strong CCS component to it. Next to it, we have, of course, Zero Emissions Platform, which I think is a really important platform for a dialogue between the European Union and the different member organizations of the Zero Emission Platform. And I think it could be a real strong tool to foster the dialogue with the European Commission. And I think it just needs to be properly resourced, properly funded, so we can leverage that platform to the best of our abilities. Beyond that, do I think the European Commission needs to establish yet another platform? I'm not convinced. There are certain elements where I think this could be useful. It was mentioned in one of the earlier panels around pipeline networks, permitting, planning for pipeline networks, particularly onshore Europe, is an area that I think could benefit from closer coordination. So perhaps that's an area. But overall, I do think we have all the tools in place to have an effective dialogue. And I agree also with Rodolfo, what the European Commission has done. We welcome very much recently. And I think that's good. Establishing more forums. I just worry it runs the risk of fragmenting actually the engagement process.
Well, that would be very good news, I think, to Eva here, because you did say that ZEP or something like it needs to be properly resourced. So I take it he's going to get his checkbook out before the end of it and provide you with the materials. So you're actually saying that actually you don't think we need a partnership. I mean, people just, there's some of these alliances, the Battery Alliance in particular is often talked about in very positive terms. I've never been on one of these things. I don't know to what extent they, I don't know what extent they make a difference over and above existing organisations. Have you any feel about that?
So as I said, I think we have platforms. Do we need yet another industry forum partnership? As I said, I'm not convinced at this stage. Partnerships between private and public bodies are, of course, tremendously important to drive the industry forward, right? So what we do with Kadri and EBN in the Netherlands, for example, is a strong public-private partnership to actually drive the early stages of the CCS industry in Europe. So that's critical. Do we yet need another engagement platform or another partnership? As I said, I remain unconvinced, a bit like you, Chris.
I scribbled a few notes here about what a partnership or an alliance, what sort of cover areas we need to cover to take CCS forward. First of all, it's the banging the drum. It's the raising awareness within the institutions. It's the technical advice, providing solutions to problems, looking at issues of finance, for example, of people, where's the money going to come from? Knowledge sharing. The CCUS observatory has been touched. I mean, maybe is that going to be separate or would that be part of it? The whole issue of the political advocacy. Can an alliance within the Commission, under the auspices of a Commission, carry out political advocacy? I'm not sure. There's the issue of the project network, which has also been discussed. Should that come under this? Broader communications. I mean, there's lots of issues here, things that it should be covering. Peter, you're a supporter of the idea of an alliance being created, I think, for Gas Uni, and because there's business opportunities presumably for Gas Uni. You see CCS, the company.
I think so. Yeah, sure. I think if you have, I don't know if we need more platforms, but I think we need stronger platforms. If we look at the narrative that we now have in the EU on the whole ambition of the CCS level, it's only 50 MTPA. That's nothing, right? That's only 5% of the overall ETS. So I think there's a lack of a strong narrative. There's a lack of a strong ambition. So I'm not sure that we need more platforms. I think we need a much louder voice. And please let there be one very loud voice rather than 10 very small voices. And I think as GASNI, we work very much together with the likes of Shell, with EBM, with other companies. And that's the way to bring things forward. So we can wait till the EU has a platform or have vision, or we can just crack on and start doing projects. And that's what we're also doing.
Thank you. Eva, you're now chair of Zero Emissions Platform. ZEP's been around since 2005, theoretically providing technical advice to the Commission, but I know that's sort of moving towards a broader sphere. And you've got ideas for how it should be changed. So this is a threat, isn't it? I mean, there's bound to be duplication. I mean, what does ZEP do if there's an alliance, and how do you see it going forward?
Well, we see it rather as an opportunity, because in the end of the day, what matters is creating the right governance in the EU that helps to get the CCS deployed, right? That's the end purpose that we are catering for. So Zero Emissions Platform is combining a broad range of stakeholders, starting from the industry, oil and gas, academia, NGOs. So it's broad, and it brings all of these different viewpoints together. Historically, indeed, mostly offering technical advice to the EU and working a lot on research and innovation. But I would say during the last 5 years, especially since the Green Deal communication came out, more and more, I would say now doing majority of our work that is outside that very technical space. So this technical R&I is still very important, and it continues to be important, because if we heard the speech of Kadri Simson yesterday, again, she mentioned that also there's going to be focus on that in the upcoming strategy. But meanwhile, we do know that we need to create all the necessary policy frameworks and conditions, and we need to have this political advocacy happening. So we need all of that. I think you're at some point going to ask me spot on, okay, do we need something in addition? Can we just build on what's there? I probably will not give you a specific answer. Let's see what comes out from the strategy. I'm not sure how much that is already baked in, and how much what we say here today will feed into it. If there is going to be an initiative, ZEP is definitely there to support it, potentially help to build it, and hopefully be very much engaged in it. We've also heard from many stakeholders, and also here on stage today, that strengthening the organization that we have today, and we're actually currently going through some restructuring to strengthen the organization and make it better fit for purpose, make it more resilient and catering for what the CCS actually needs today. We can take all these needs also into account there and build for something that is needed. So we have already acted for a long time as a glue between different stakeholders, between the EU institutions, between the governments. So if we look at all these different pieces that are needed, and also when we listen to the conversations we've had here over the last 2 days, it feels like there is nothing that is not happening at all. Everything is happening, but it feels like we need more of most things. And the question is, how do we make it happen?
Okay, you and I have talked many times, so you know that CCS Europe, that I'm promoting, is emphasizing political advocacy and communications to policymakers. And there's always huge other realm of activities which we don't want to get involved in. Many of them are traditional ZEP activities, if you like. Rodolphe, it should come in though. Okay, it gets set up. There's an alliance, and it's a battery alliance, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. But who's going to be on it? And rather, who's not going to be on it?
Well, I think one important thing from the process that we have, I would say, conducted during the last year and a half, it's there is a need for a diversity of stakeholders. Okay, I'm glad that you have invited one of the hard-to-abate sector into that process in a certain way, because I think this is also what we are talking about. As a lime sector representatives, we are among those hard-to-abate sectors. We have more than 70% of unavoidable CO2 process emissions, and we are spread a bit everywhere on the EU territory. So we are not CO2 transport specialist. We are not CO2 storage experts and so on. So we need to expand as well this collaboration to learn with some of those stakeholders. But we need to do everything at the same time. This is where it's a bit tricky. So we also are sharing the situation with most of the policymakers, actually, in the different countries. I got 25 national lime associations, member of EULA. They are addressing and they are discussing, engaging the different topics related to CCUS with the national authorities. Sometimes they are discussing with 1, 2, 3, till 6, 7 different kind of institutions or authorities to trying to reach out a decision or a view on what needs to be done. So there is a need to step up at every level at the same time on the fundings, on the technologies, on the regulations, on the collaboration level, if we want to be on our decarbonization pathway. So this is why I started by saying that we need to be, I would say, up to the task. And there is a change of paradigm. CCUS needs to be deployed, no discussion about this, and how to do it, this is the next question.
Okay, well, I come from a political background, as you know, so I tend to ask critical questions. Whereas it may well be that industry wants to work sort of within the Commission or influence from within, rather than be critical in that way. But how, if the members of an alliance, if this is a Commission body, how do you have a free voice to criticise the Commission when you really don't think it's doing what is necessary to promote the technology?
Well, it's a question. Well, you have to tackle and to put in place, as you've said, a good governance in place, a balanced approach. I mean, regarding the diversity of the stakeholders, regarding civil society, regarding different actors, national authorities, European ones, and so on. It's already in place in different industrial partnerships. It works quite well. Now it's definitely a question on how to deliver at the end. What's going to be the KPI that we can put in place? How are we going to assess this, and so on? But well, to my point of view, it's nothing that we can match over there.
Okay. So, but Bernard, you really put the opposite case there, or the alternative case, which is that I suppose we need external actors to be strengthened. The Commission, Wind Europe or something, I suppose the equivalent would be a body to which you would expect the Commission to go both for technical advice, for expert advice, and also knowing that they're beating the drum all the time for their technology.
Yeah, indeed. So having a platform for dialogue, I think, is hugely important, right? Because it needs to be an informed debate from both sides. I do think the European Commission has done very important steps recently with the NCIA or the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy that's about to be issued. I think these are great steps, and through industry dialogue with indeed a broad set of stakeholders, I believe that these policies can then be really fit for purpose and drive the industry forward. So I think the mechanisms are there. We just need to make sure that we resource them and sort of participate properly from all sides. And I think for us, it's also important to recognize that ultimately this will take emitters, it will take transport providers, it will take storage providers, it will take the general public, it will take research institution, a lot of R&D intervention. So the targeted intervention required by the European Union, if I put a sort of a broader context around it, needs to be sort of in all areas of the value chain in order to make CCS successful and scale it to where we need to scale it to.
Do you see CCS as a business opportunity for Shell?
CCS has to become a business opportunity ultimately, Chris. If it does not it doesn't provide commensurate returns to the risk that the industry is taking, it will never attract the funding for it to scale to where it needs to scale. So we need to come to a place whereby investors in any part of that value chain are getting fairly compensated for the risk that are being taken. So, and we believe that will happen. It will just take time, and it will require support, especially in the early stages of the industry.
Okay, and Peter, for Gasunie, a business opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
If you're a gas TSO, the gas market is not going to be there in 40, 50 years' time, so you need to find different infrastructure places where you can be, and I think CCS is absolutely one of the key elements where we want to be and where it's going to be big.
And if we need hundreds of carbon capture projects over the next few years, and we do, if we're to meet that target of 300 million tons of CO2 storage by 2050, then there are huge business opportunities for the builders of capture plants, for example, and pipelines and ship builders and the rest. But is it? I mean, you've talked about resources. Are enough resources being put by industry into something which potentially creates huge opportunities for them?
No, not yet, because there's just not enough visibility on the overall market. When we were doing the Portos project, we actually had difficulties finding sufficient contractors. And at the end of the day, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for all market participants, including the contractors. And as soon as the contractors see this is a key market where they can play an important role, and they can earn money for the decades to come, they will start to become active in this industry. I think the parallel with the offshore wind industry is quite clear. I've been working in the offshore wind industry for quite a long time, and also there, the branch organization was extremely strong, and it did a perfect job to make sure that the whole value chain was actually mobilized. And I think we need to do exactly the same. Mobilize the emitters, but also mobilize the contractors, mobilize the TSO, mobilize the finance community to make everybody aware of this opportunity and to get them on board, planting seeds with all these different participants.
And same sort of question to you, Bernard, really. I mean, in fact, remember having a go at your chief executive about this once. I mean, a CCS project is enormously expensive, and there has to be a business case for the investment, and that probably means public sector support of one kind or another. But I've never understood why the oil and gas industry, knowing there are commercial opportunities here, has not put more money into advocacy to help change the political agenda. And instead, all too often, as you know, we get criticised by environmentalists for CCS being simply a means of propping up the fossil fuel industry.
So I think the industry is doing a lot, given the nascency of the industry. So if you look at Shell, we are investing in Aramis together with Gazanie, EBN and Total. We are investing in Northern Lights. It's actually a project in execution, ready for startup at the end of next year. There's an expansion phase that we're working on. We are an investor in Aagaard in the UK. We are investing in a multitude of pipeline feasibility studies, like Delta Rhine Corridor, for example. We are a customer in Portos and worked quite closely with Portos through the FID process. We've taken licenses in the southern North Sea for future expansion of CCS in that sector. So the industry is doing a lot, and we're investing a lot of money in that space. Of course, ultimately, it needs to, as you said, it needs to come to a point where it's profitable. Because otherwise it will never scale, and we never be able to attract the funding it ultimately requires to scale to 5 to 7 gigatons by 2050.
You know the rebuttal, and the rebuttal, of course, is that compared to the amount of money still being put into oil and gas exploration, this is small scale.
Well, I mean, just speaking for Shell, we're investing between $10 to $15 billion over a 3-year cycle in low carbon energies. That's a very significant investment given where the industry is.
Yeah, and I think indeed, as a partner in the Aramis project, I can confirm that we are extremely happy with the contribution of Total and also of Shell. It's very important that these parties participate with the technology knowledge that they actually bring to the table. That's extremely important. One of the things these parties also can do, but I think that's for the entire value chain, is open up on all the information that's actually in the value chain. Show the economics, show the technology constraints, share that information so that you can have much more view on the entire value chain. And if you view over the entire value chain, you can try to optimize that. And because we're now working in different buckets, it's quite difficult to optimize the entire value chain. And I think there's a key role that industry participants can actually play, open up the information in the entire value chain.
Ever though, when it comes to finance, my group, but much more your group, I mean, you've been struggling for finance for as long as I can remember, given the amount of work that needs to be done to scale up CCS, the number of member states that are really not addressing the issue at all. The opportunities for doing more are there, but the money, organisations like yours, mine, the resources are not being provided in the way that are needed.
Well,
you're scraping around all the time.
It's obvious that will need to change, right? Also, the reality for CCS has changed so much that now we need to have much stronger, better finance organizations, better finance potential initiatives, alliances, whatever. The finance needs to come there to make it happen, because without any additional funding, we will just not be able to support these technologies to the extent that is needed, right, to really get them up and running. I wanted to do a little, fix one mistake I said in the beginning, right? As I have the microphone. I said that we are doing already, everything is happening everywhere, but maybe not at the scale needed. I think there is one area where there is an obvious gap, and that's the knowledge sharing between the projects. We heard yesterday that the Commission intends to launch an initiative for that. I don't know if it's going to be something separate or how exactly it's going to be structured in their industrial carbon management strategy. But this is something we've already for a while back also pointed out in ZEP, and we ourselves have launched a project network where the first meeting is due to take place in January in collaboration with Porto. So thank you. Thank you, Peter, also for your collaboration on that front. So having these kind of, and potentially this could then inform what comes and continues under the Commission, and we'll be very, very keen to work very closely with the Commission with making that happen, because these kind of exchanges have really tangible results. They can reduce the project lead times, and we saw the graph that the IEA presented yesterday. The number of years is way too much. We need to cut that down, and also it practically is making projects slightly cheaper because they can learn from each other's potential mistakes or best practices and all of that. So that will need to happen. To maybe to react also on something that Bernard said earlier, the fact that we already have, when you talk about carbon capture and storage and also CCU, we have many organizations that already exist. Whatever we are building or building more of, it has to be built with this in mind. So either we're strengthening existing organizations or we're building something additional, but if we do, it has to fit into the current landscape. And most importantly, you also mentioned, okay, what other alliances exist and how well they operate. If there is going to be something new, we need to make very sure that that it's built for success, and there is a moment to take stock and see that if it's not going in a direction or it's not delivering what it's supposed to, that it can be course corrected, because as you say, we cannot have another talk shop. We have enough venues already where CCS people meet and discuss, and we cannot have them discuss the same things in yet another one and not having any impact on that. So
interesting. That's an interesting point, but it's always difficult to get a talking shop to stop talking, even when it's not talking very effectively.
So the question is then, how do you start with it, and what kind of milestones are there, and what kind of KPIs you set, and how do you then evaluate that, and being able to course correct. I know in some other areas that I work, we've ended up with some international initiatives that people are participating in just because they're afraid of, if they're not there, things go even more wrong. But we have to definitely not go there, right? We want to build things where people are excited to participate, to make the change happen, and to see the actual results that come from it. I don't know if you want to talk about governments at a later stage.
Can I come back?
Yeah.
Rodolphe, can we just touch on the whole business of industry and taking initiatives of one kind? Now, in the lime case, I'm not sure there were business opportunities. It's just necessary. The CCS is a necessary tool in order to reduce the emissions from the production of lime. And you've got hundreds of members or associations with hundreds of members. I mean, how effective are they at getting the message across to their governments? And to what extent are you working with other industries to crank this up? Because as we know, there are still many, many governments which are not addressing it seriously.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I would love to have hundreds of members. I got only 25 national lime associations, and some of them are only one-man show here and there, obviously. But they are building some alliances, like the CCS Europe at European level, but also at local level with the out-debate sectors as well, to address the topic, to understand in which direction we can go. As I said previously, we are all in a kind of a learning curve, all of us in a certain way on this topic, which is a bit surprising because CCUS is not a new topic at all. first of all. And the second is that how to take a decision among the different policymakers. It's also a big question mark in some countries, I have to say, because you have to discuss with many different representatives from different ministries and so on and so on. So we all have to understand how we're going to be able to go in the right direction. So this is why we are calling for more investment from the member states and commitment from the member states to clearly tackle the issue the right way, because I think everything is moving up. I can see into our business the big decisions are taken in terms of investments. We are moving in the right direction. We are trying to put all the efforts that we can do in that sense. But again, we have produced a roadmap at national and European level as well. A lot of enablers are out of our control, out of our hands. So we need to collaborate with the full value chain, as Peter was saying, with a diversity of stakeholders as well. And we need to convince more people. So we need to be, up to the task again. It has been said, change of paradigm, we need to deliver now. That means we need to go to the other level. And for that, interesting report from the Clean Air Task Force organization, pointing out where the different national plans has been, tackling the CCUS discussion or not, what it is into it, and so on. Those are reference materials that we can use to understand on which basis we can have a discussion with the national authorities. So this is what we are doing currently.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. I have, I'm a CCS enthusiast. I've been convinced for 15, 16 years that we need this technology, especially for the hard-to-abate sectors. Although when I started, it was all coal. I mean, just show how things have moved on. It was all coal projectors that came to see us in 2008. And amongst them was WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature, who were actually in favor of CCS. And then a few years later, they came out with a statement which said that CCS is an unfortunate but probably necessary technology. And I, because as a CCS enthusiast, I wasn't hugely excited by this, but it's probably quite an accurate way of going around it. But what we haven't got, be it industry or from the environmental side, is real recognizable champions. I don't know, I'm still looking, I'm looking for champions in the European Parliament, I'm looking for champions in the national parliament. Most people tend to regard CCS as an unfortunate but probably necessary technology. You got any solutions, anyone? Find me a champion.
That's a good point, yeah.
Anybody? Okay. Right, one question. What role do you see for the CCS Forum as a stakeholder platform? Okay, this body. Well, we're told we're going to France next year. Please.
So we are obviously waiting to see what's in the industrial carbon management strategy. And I think CCUS Forum could be well placed to help implement some of those elements. So probably the strategy will have quite a bit of impact on exactly which working groups and how we'll continue working under the CCUS Forum. So that's kind of the obvious role that I see. Because it has been great in mobilizing such a wide group of stakeholders, and it makes sense to keep utilizing that and building on that.
How useful do you find it? I mean, this is the second live one. We've had, of course, online in recent years. But I mean, there are other occasions when CCS people get together and talk with other CCS people.
I think we can measure results afterwards, potentially. Personally, I might be the wrong person to ask because that's the first one I'm attending in person. So there's that. Well, but in general, the momentum we're having
have all the excitement here, of a newbie. Yes.
Okay. The momentum has changed completely, though. If you think back 2 years away or 5 years away, what we were discussing here yesterday and what we hear by the governments, the types of governments we see, I mean, the whole landscape has changed. So there's definitely, it's a place we see how the progress is happening. We have countries on the panels that previously wouldn't even mention the word CCS. It was the area that didn't exist for them, or they were actively lobbying against it, right? So there is a huge change, and I think these settings are great to take stock of where we are, announce new initiatives, and move forward. So absolutely, it has an amazing role. And look at as we all heard, we are the lucky ones in the room because there was such a long list of people who were in the list and who didn't make it into the room, and I know that there are many people following online as well, so it shows that it's a success story as well.
Okay, Bernard, again, must have been to vast numbers of events. Is this useful to you?
I think it's incredibly useful. It's incredibly useful to bring such a sort of broad spectrum of the CCS industry together and have these conversations, ranging from policy to technical specifications to what we're discussing around sort of alignment between policymakers and private investors into the industry. I think it's critical. If we don't have these dialogues, and if I just look at some of the announcements that have been made in and around sort of this forum here, they really drive our industry forward. So I'm a big fan, and I think we should continue to have these engagements.
Of course, it's being driven forward by not only the requirement, ever increasing requirement to reduce emissions fast, but also the business case is improving all the time.
And it needs to improve all the time, right? If we want to, as we said before, if you want to scale this to 5-7 gigatons, it requires a lot more capital to flow into the CCS industry, and it needs certain maturation, it needs certain alignment, standardization in order for this to happen over the years. And I think these forums are critical to achieve that, to achieve a common understanding of what currently still gets in the way. What are the things that we need to iron out in the years to come, and ultimately make this a more competitive industry so that it becomes more affordable for the emitters and ultimately provides a return that compensates for the risk that the different participants in the value chain are taking.
And Peter?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I can only echo these words. I think one thing to add is your opening remarks. Let's aim for more. FIDs. So more FID decisions. One thing I want to do is to thank the Porters team. So I haven't done it yet, but let me on stage. A big thank you for the Porters team for achieving the financial close this year, 1 month ago. So construction has now started. So there's a team of, I think it's 80 people working day to day on getting the project in the water, in the ground, and that's really, really a big achievement.
Can I just pick you up on that? It's just that it was said yesterday by Hans that the Portos pipeline is already fully sold. I mean, you've got customers to fill it.
It is.
So shouldn't you be building a bigger pipeline?
We are planning that. Yeah. So basically, what you basically see if you build one project, then you see what the next needs to be, and if you build that, then it's like you're working on the stairs. The moment you deliver a project, you see what the next project is. So that's what the Porters did for us. So we're now doing the Aramis project, which is a very big trunk line. But we're also looking at other entry points in the Netherlands and also towards Antwerp, towards the German market, to make sure we deliver more CO2 towards that pipeline. So the Porters is the onshore capacity is 10 MTPA. That's already booked, so we're extremely pleased with that. A big part of that will go to the Aramis trunk line. The CO2 next terminal, this import terminal, is going to be 5 MTPA. It's going to be sourced to the Aramis trunk line. And then the next project is the Delta Rhine corridor. Not yet decided how big it's going to be, but if it's going to connect to the Antwerp port and to the German Rhine area, it's probably going to be 45 MTPA.
So tell us, what's been the reaction in the Netherlands to this? I mean, for us, it's been a big announcement. We've been waiting for it for a long time. There is, of course, a political agreement to support CCS in the Netherlands, but it's not universal. There's not universal support for the technology.
No, I think so. Let me begin with the positive ones. So I think throughout the market, especially the industry, extremely positive. Environmental organizations, extremely positive. All kinds of stakeholders, Port of Rotterdam, everybody extremely positive. Politicians, I may have picked up 2 or 3 tweets, max. So they are quite reluctant to profile themselves on this team. And I think that's where we need to work on.
We're the champions.
We're the champions. So we need to work on this narrative. Actually, if you look at the industry and you look at the opportunity, if there's an alternative for CCS, yes, please. But I don't think there is an alternative. So this is something we really need to do. So let's do it and support it.
Thank you. Rodolphe, you coming to Pau next year?
Oh, definitely. I love the city and the area, and I'm French myself, so that's a good news. But perhaps, CCUS Forum put the CCUS topic back on the agenda. So congratulations for that. That was needed, obviously. But we shouldn't keep anything for granted. We don't know what's going to be the final outcome of the NZA. If we are talking about the 50 MTP target, it was not yet clear on which direction we go. The strategy, we don't know what we're going to have into it, and so on and so on. So we should not take anything for granted. Keep in mind that this CCUS forum has been put on hold for more than 10 years. Okay, so I don't know what's going to be the work program of the next European Commission. I don't know what's going to be the position of the next national government on the CCUS issues. So we need really to feel the sense of the emergency because we want to keep the industry in Europe. We want to decarbonize. So we need to definitely put something in the stone if we want to transform the try.
Well, I asked you at the beginning to convince me as a former parliamentarian of which way I should vote on the Industrial Alliance, Industrial Partnership. I am not convinced one way or the other, because the devil is in the detail. We have yet to see exactly what this alliance proposal will consist of, what areas it will cover, and who will be its members and who will not be its members, and what effect it will have on other organisations. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for our last panel, and I'm sure we can continue that discussion. I heard something about very nice white wine that was produced just south of Po that we could continue the discussion with. So now there will be a short break, and the reason for this break is that currently all the Commission teams are now hammering away on the keyboard to make sure that they have all the notes for the conclusion. So what will happen is that you will have a short break. You will come back here, and the Commission will read up the conclusion of what they take with them from this event. So you also, again, of course, you'll have a small assignment from me. Please try to think, what did you learn? What are you taking? What are you sort of taking home from this conference? See you back 11:30. Oh, sorry, 50.
So.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can I please ask you to sit down? Or I would like to present to you the draft conclusions, or better to say, read out the draft of the conclusions of this year's forum. Thanks, Chris. So the draft conclusions have been drafted by us, but they will be shared with you tomorrow. And you will have also the chance to comment on these draft conclusions in the next 2 weeks. And then we will finalize the conclusions and publish them on the website of the CCUS forum. So with this, I go to the draft conclusions. And it always starts, so every sentence starts with the forum, which I'm not going to repeat every time. The forum thanked the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities for co-hosting the CCUS forum in Aalborg, and congratulated the French Ministry for Energy Transition for being selected as the next co-host of the forum. It called on the European Commission to publish the industrial carbon management strategy in the first quarter of 2024 and welcomed the numerous initiatives to develop national carbon management strategies. The forum reiterated the need of a speedy deployment of CCS, CCU and carbon removal technologies to reach the EU climate goals, and in particular climate neutrality by 2050. It welcomed the Commission's announcements to launch the knowledge-sharing project network, to initiate work on common CO2 standards for transport infrastructure, and to launch the CCUS Observatory for cement and waste incineration plants. It underlined the role of the CCUS Forum in operationalizing these initiatives. The Forum praised the Commission's announcement to set up a coordination mechanism to plan an EU-wide CO2 infrastructure and stressed that such planning should consider also the repurposing of existing hydrocarbon infrastructure. It welcomed the adoption by the Commission of the new PCI PMI list containing 14 CO2 infrastructure projects. The Forum welcomed the signing of the Aalborg Declaration by Denmark, France, Germany, the Netherlands and Sweden. It praised the results of the working groups of the Forum on an Industrial Initiative, on CO2 infrastructure and on public awareness, endorsed the issue papers tabled by the three groups. The Forum praised the Commission's initiative to include CCS in the Net Zero Industry Act and called on the co-legislators to proceed to a swift adoption of the regulation. It stressed the positive impact the integration of Norway and the UK would have on the availability of sufficient storage capacity. The Forum praised the Innovation Fund contribution to supporting large-scale projects. The Forum welcomed the new report of the IEA on CCS business models. The Forum called on the EU and Member States to put in place more funding and de-risking mechanisms, making carbon management projects bankable. It stressed the need of targeted subsidies and a coordinated permitting process to deploy projects on time. The Forum underlined the importance of proactive storage exploration and deployment as the issue with the longest lead time in the value chain. It called on the Member States to step up their efforts to explore their territories for CO2 storage potential. The forum called on the Commission to continue their work on a fit-for-purpose EU regulatory framework for CO2 transport based on transparent and non-discriminatory access conditions. In this context, it stressed the need to avoid stifling the development of the nascent carbon market. It underlined the role of the forum as a consultation platform in this process. The forum underlined the urgency to set common CO2 quality standards to enable the functioning of an EU-wide interoperable CO2 transport market. It underlined the need to support capture projects located away from industrial hubs without the means to connect to CO2 transport networks. The forum called on the Commission to integrate biogenic CO2 emissions into the EU ETS to incentivize the creation of an industrial carbon removals market and to address the issue of possible double counting. The forum stressed the importance of CCU and the need to improve the business case of some projects. It underlined the issue of permanence as regards of CO2 binding in products. The forum called on the Commission, Member States and project developers to step up their efforts to raise public awareness of industrial carbon management, including regarding benefits for local communities. It encouraged further discussion and research on the issue of public awareness. The forum underlined the role of international cooperation in industrial carbon management and of knowledge sharing in particular. It welcomed the launch of the Carbon Management Challenge, enhancing global cooperation, and invited more countries to subscribe to its objectives. The forum stressed the need to involve industrial stakeholders more, to enable EU-wide project coordination and to optimize deployment timelines and costs. It called on the Commission to include a strong mechanism for public-private cooperation in the industrial carbon management strategy, taking into account existing structures. The forum agreed to continue the working group on CO2 infrastructure with its expert group on standards and the working group on public awareness. It recommended creating a forum working group on CCU. These were the draft conclusions. As I said in the beginning, we'll send it to all of you for comments and we'll expect your comments within the next 2 weeks. Before I leave the stage again to Anders, let me just briefly thank the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities for co-hosting this forum also on behalf of the European Commission. And I would also like to give special thanks to Anders as our host and Master of Ceremony of the forum. Thank you very much for that. To Yasmin and her team, and to Anita and her team for all the work they have done in organizing this forum here in Aalborg. And I would also like to give other special thanks to the Commission team, and in particular to Chris, who was here the mastermind behind the forum, the first forum and all the fora since then. And of course, I also would like to thank all of you for being here in Aalborg, for coming to this forum, for your active participation, and also would like to thank all of you online listening to us yesterday and today. I hope we will see all of you, or many of you again next year in Po. And with that, I give back the floor to Anders to wrap up this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Just a few sort of practical announcement and then a few thank you from my side also. There will be a short lunch break outside, and for those of you who are going on the site visit, there will be buses just outside the door, so you really can't miss them. So that should be quite simple. I was trying to think about a way to sort of summarize the conference, and I got us inspired by Willy from Honeywell, who actually had why not talk about the why and the what and the how. And I decided that let me try to see if I can boil down these 2 days into to these concepts. If we start with the why, I think when we heard the two ministers and the commissioner, I think there was a very, very clear why. And the why was that we needed to raise our climate, we needed to meet our climate goal as they are part of society where we cannot solve the problem with energy efficiency and renewable energy. So I think it was very deliberate in all of their speeches that we need the CCUS, but we also need renewable, we need energy efficiency, so there are places where we can't use those two, and that's where we need them. So I think that was a very clear why from all of them. The why, the how, I think most of the panels sort of had various discussion about, I mean, how do we actually have what kind of approach do we need? And I think it's sort of, there are many good points. I try to sort of summarize them in 5 hows. I mean, first, by remembering that we need to involve the 3 Ps. So we need to involve people, public and private. That was the first one. The second one was by developing the market through good policy frameworks. And we know they're not going to be perfect in the start, so we shouldn't over-regulate, but we need to start. And I think that was also mentioned very nicely in the conclusion. Then thirdly, we need to remember all parts of the value chain. I think many of the panelists sort of said that, well, I mean, if we don't have the purity of the CO2 the same way and we don't have transport, I mean, nothing's going to work. So this is a value chain, the chicken and egg, all of that. We really need to address that. Fourth, by coordinating across countries. So I think there were a lot of panels that really sort of highlighted the need to, you can't solve this at one country, and if you do that, it's going to be extremely expensive. So this whole idea that you can lower costs, by increasing scale, and you can also increase innovation by having more countries participate. And then finally the how, by remembering it's a CCU and a CCS. I think quite a few panels sort of, I know the title has CCUS, but I think most of the panels sort of had the conclusion that it was quite important that we actually decided that were 2 separate parts and equal importance that we need to focus on both. So that was a how. The what. I actually stopped at some point taking notes on the what. I mean, there are so many whats and so many things you need to do. I think one of the things I really liked, one of the comments I really liked was that we need to create winners. We need to sort of do copy-paste on regulation, on business models. I mean, we need to do this fast, so we need the copy-paste. We need to have engaging conversation. We cannot solve this by just providing information. We need pipelines, and we need them both for CO2, we need them also for hydrogen. We need to scale up. We need bankable product. We need to develop storage. We need to nail permits. We need to, so on and so on. I mean, I'm not going to read them all of them, but I think I will read the final one. We need more countries to sign the Aalborg Declaration. So that was a very brief way, hopefully, to summarize by using the how and the what. Yep, thank you. And that was basically my summarize. So let me thank you for being here. Let me thank the online participant for being online. And of course, also thank you all the moderators and the speakers. I think all of you did an extremely good job. And of course, I also want to thank the local team here in Aalborg. I think this venue and also sort of getting around here has been great. So I hope you all appreciate the hard work that has been done by them. We had 2 sponsors. We had the Danish Federation of Industry yesterday and this morning, and also Innomission, that with the welcome reception. I think they also was very good. And then thank you so much for the close cooperation we have had with the Commission. I think we together, hopefully, we did something that all of you enjoy. And of course, I also want to thank my own team for working extremely hard. And as you mentioned, I think especially 2 of them, Anita and Jasmine, have worked enormous amount of hours to make this possible. So with that, I think actually we should give them a hand. And with people clapping, I will also just say thank you from my side. I hope to see many of you next year in France, where we'll be drinking very nice French white wine. Thank you.